Okay, so it has been several months since I first watched this show, and I have still not emotionally processed this Jaehaerys murder scene. And at this point, I don't know if I'm ever going to be able to process it. It might haunt me forever. But I'm going to do my best, and my best happens to be a video. Who needs a therapist when you have YouTube? Anyway, obviously there are a lot of factors that make this scene traumatic. The youngness of the child, the helplessness of the mother, the innocence of both, the senseless nature of the killing, the length of time it takes, the struggle, the suddenness. But, this is not the first time we have seen a child die in this show or in Game of Thrones. We are expecting some brutal, innocent collateral damage in this kind of world. And it's also not the first time we have seen a mother grieving the loss of her child. But while those other scenes are painful and difficult, there is something about this scene in this show that just slammed me so much harder into a wall of sad than any other death scene I've ever encountered. And I came up with a bunch of surface reasons, but nothing that justified the emotional depth of this moment. It was fairly obvious that a massive part of the horror was Helena's perspective as a mother. It wouldn't read the same if this child was her brother, or lover, or friend, or someone else close to her. But because this scene still hits harder than even any other mother tragedy moment we see in other stories, it stands to reason that there is something unusually potent that this show is doing with motherhood that gives this scene its edge. So, that brings me to my set of central questions. What is this show's concept of motherhood? How does it shape the story, and why is it so powerful? The entire show revolves around motherhood, so there's kind of a lot of data to work with here. It seems to present a specific kind of motherhood that I've never seen anywhere else, or a specific side of motherhood that nobody ever addresses, or at least never gets addressed in polite conversation, much less a massively popular high-budget show. And honestly, I can't believe I didn't clock it immediately, because in the very first episode, with the scene that sets the expectations for the rest of the show, there is this birth scene with Aemma Targaryen, and it is brutal. If you were to go over the worst possible outcome of a birth, it would be this. There are always at least 2 lives at stake, and this scene loses both of them. The mom dies, and the baby dies. But even beyond this, the nuances in the way they die are brutal. The king makes an impossible decision and prioritizes the baby over the mother, and after he makes that decision, she knows what's about to happen and she begs for her life. We're somewhat conditioned in Western media to expect a noble, self-sacrificing mother here. Save the baby, do what you need to do. Instead, she has a very honest, raw reaction. She doesn't want to die. And then after she does die, the child seems to be fine, and then also dies. I think that's really about as horrible as you can get. And this show does not shy away from any of it. I get showing suffering so that the audience takes your world seriously and your characters seriously. It can draw sympathy for characters who haven't earned it yet and pull the audience in emotionally. But this scene feels like it is doing something more than that. By having it be in the first episode, by having it be with a character who basically appears for a couple of scenes and then dies, a character we don't even have time to properly connect with, it's shocking, and it sets the tone for what the rest of the season is going to revolve around. They want you to understand the cost. Even if you don't understand and will never actually experience the emotional or physical pain associated with birth, they are determined to completely dispel the perfect glorified birth scene that we're used to seeing in stuff like this. The stupid scene with a woman sweating on a bed with her bits hidden by dress and or sheets, and someone says push and she probably does a little yell, and then poof, baby born and baby crying. You don't really see the gore. You don't see women trailing blood after giving birth. It's rare to even see women doing any recovery after labor. You don't even see the full labor. It takes hours, days even, to get to this point. Even Game of Thrones shies away from full gory glory birth scenes. They just give us the standard birth sequence I just described. Daenerys doesn't even get that much. This moment could have been 100 times more brutal and horrifying and formative than the way that they depicted it. Game of Thrones, one of the most famously brutal shows of all time, is scared of birth. House of the Dragon then takes that disastrous Aemma scene with its massive stakes and repeats it over and over again. I think the show has the most birth sequences of any show I have ever seen. They want you to feel the consequences of that first birth breathing down your neck every single time they show you a mother with a swollen belly. They want you to feel the same fear that the mothers feel, and they don't let you breathe either. There is only one successful birth, and it is still very difficult to watch. They give you a massively graphic and traumatic miscarriage. They give you a shocking scene where a woman commits suicide with her baby still unborn. It feels raw, it feels honest, and it also feels horrible, and no other popular work really explores that. We are conditioned to expect moms sacrificing everything for their baby. They're supposed to die nobly, with their child growing up knowing that their mother loved them. But no, this show wants you to understand that sometimes the agony of motherhood is so profound that death is not a sacrifice. It is a blessing. Once you establish the price of motherhood, you start seeing patterns in the way different characters pay it. For example, they use this difficult, gory part of motherhood to emphasize how strong Rhaenyra is. There's 2 sequences that she has. There's the only successful birth, and immediately after, she has to flip into political fight mode.
Hold on. Where are you going?
She wants to see him.
Now? I'm coming with you.
I should hope so.
Let me take him.
I shall get no such satisfaction from you.
She trails blood all over the floor. And there's the miscarriage, which is, again, awful, traumatic, and visceral. And then immediately after, she has to flip into political fight mode. She doesn't have time to grieve or even go into shock. And she's not even surprised at these awful things that are happening to her. Because, like all the other unpleasant aspects of her life and position, she's accepted that this is a reality of the path that she has chosen. Motherhood. So if motherhood sucks this bad, and she is a person who does not do things simply out of tradition or convention, why is she momming in the first place? I mean, she obviously tried with Laenor, and when Laenor didn't work out, she had children with her side hoe, who would obviously produce children who will look bastardy. And no, it's not just because she was horny. To have that many kids, she is obviously having them with intent. She could have just had her side hoe and avoided ovulation days. But the spread of children is too perfect and the number is excessive. She wants children. Why? Why is she willing to risk this and suffer this? What is she paying the cost for? Going back to my original question, what is this show doing with motherhood that makes it so potent? You have to understand what it is doing with the children. So then I started examining what children do within the context of the story. They are one of the few who can ride dragons. They're a literal army. Beyond that, they strengthen a contender's claim to the throne. A secure line of succession means a higher likelihood of the realm being okay with you taking the Iron Throne. It's a physical representation of possible future stability. Children are literally an expression of power. And Rhaenyra's desire to have children and her willingness to pay the emotional and physical price is an expression of her ambition. But there is also a flip side here. The children can help you win the conflict, but in doing so, they become the stakes of the conflict. Let me show you what I mean. Before Rhaenyra became a mother, what was the story about? It's about whether Rhaenyra gets to be queen or not. Will she be accepted by the realm? Will she mature into the role? Like, that is a story, but on its own, it's not a very nuanced or emotionally compelling one. The worst thing that could happen, she gets a mean nickname like Rhaenys did. The queen that never was. And then she gets to go do the things she wanted to do in the first episode and just run away with her dragon and do free person things. After Rhaenyra became a mother, what was the story about? You'll notice that just before the time skip, Alicent has this conversation with her dad.
If Rhaenyra succeeds in war will follow, do you understand? The realm will not accept her, and to secure her claim, she'll have to put your children to the sword. She'll have no choice. Either you prepare Aegon to rule, or you cleave to Rhaenyra and pray for her mercy.
And then you have the time skip, and Rhaenyra is immediately reintroduced in this motherhood role, in this very painful, costly type of scene that we've been analyzing. And then immediately, the child is used as leverage against Rhaenyra. And then, all of a sudden, the senseless political drama has stakes. Not just any stakes, but extreme and horrifying stakes. These women, these mothers, are playing to win the Iron Throne for the survival of their children. They win, or their children die. And even if they do win, if they make any mistakes, their children might still die. Nothing has dramatically politically shifted during the time skip. The king is still alive, the king still says he wants to be succeeded by Rhaenyra, the conflict hasn't really shifted, but because the kids have given the conflict stakes, the whole situation becomes an order of magnitude more pressing and intense. And taking a step back, as a viewer, the whole show finally gained the level of tension that saturated Game of Thrones. But the more I engaged with that tension, the more I realized it was a kind of tension that went much deeper than Game of Thrones ever did. When I watched the first few seasons of Game of Thrones, I felt like it did a really amazing job of using death to establish stakes. I felt really stressed out every episode that I was going to watch my favorite characters die, which, to be fair, is what George R.R. Martin was going for.
My God, I really don't know what's going to happen in this book. Anyone can die. And it became so much more exciting at that point because anyone could die, the peril was real. And that's the feeling I want my readers to have, that if you're going to enter...
Fear is the feeling you want your readers to have. Yeah.
Yes, actually.
And to be fair, you should feel concerned about the characters. But among other writing issues the show dissolved into, character deaths began to feel so random that I kind of stopped caring when they happened. They weren't emotionally gripping anymore, or even shocking. Just kind of like, well, I guess they're dead now. By killing off characters randomly, it emphasizes the cold, impersonal, random aspect of death, which can be good. It's a solid aspect of world building. It really colors in the brutality. But you don't really take that expectation back into real life. You don't expect someone to get hit by a car in front of you every other day. There are places that are violent and war-torn where random death is common, but the majority of people who are watching the show will probably never experience something like that. It is good to acknowledge the fact that death can happen to everybody at any time, but not this aggressively. It's good to be able to process the extreme version of random death that Game of Thrones gives you, so that if it does happen to someone near you, it's easier to handle. But I finally realized what bugged me about those later deaths in Game of Thrones. By using death as the ultimate expression of your world's brutality, you treat death as the worst thing that could happen to your characters. If you're constantly worrying about a character randomly deciding to murder another character, or even about an arrow dropping out of the sky and slicing someone's head open, you're not thinking about things that are actually specific and significant to the character. There are some things worse than death. But with House of the Dragon, the form of death that it chooses to engage with is much more common and immediate. A significant chunk of the population experiences this kind of interaction with death at least once in their life. At least 1 in 4 pregnancies ends in a miscarriage, and that number increases when you factor in stillbirths, and increases again when you factor in childhood mortality rates. But say you manage to dodge all of the statistics and your child survives. Motherhood still means a direct confrontation with death on a daily basis. The way that mothers view common things like parks and grocery stores is different than other people. Everything becomes classified in terms of potential threats. Parking lots can be dangerous. Strangers can be dangerous. 6 inches of water can be dangerous. Food can be dangerous. Even things like blankets can be dangerous. Until the child is old enough to develop a sense of self-preservation, your job is to be that sense of preservation for them. And even if you get past that, you have to accept the complete, undeniable reality that eventually your child will die. Even if you die first, they will die at some point. And there's nothing you can do about that. You were able to give them life, but there is no way to make sure they always keep it. And yes, I'm aware that parenthood in general has this fear of losing their children. I'm not trying to minimize fatherhood here. But when you're managing the bulk of the creation of something, when you're the one physically sacrificing for the creation of something, there tends to be a specific sort of pride or societal expectation that you have some form of stewardship over that thing, or at least a firm hand in its development. The fact that you have very little control over its continued existence is a difficult truth to confront. It's really a very dark perspective on motherhood, where you might experience joy and growth, but these are not ever guarantees. What is a guarantee is that you will experience sacrifice and suffering. It's not a perspective I agree with completely. I think it's a little unbalanced. But I'm a firm believer that in order to fully appreciate the beauty and magnitude of something, you have to be willing to accept all sides of it with both eyes open, even the painful, terrifying parts. Or you will never be able to plumb the depths of joy it offers. But still, it is very, very rare to come across a piece of media that dares to confront those brutal bits in even a remotely honest way. And it's even more rare to find a piece of media that is able to weave those brutal parts into the central thesis of the show. With Game of Thrones, characters dying is our worst fear for those characters. With House of the Dragon, our worst fear is much more profound. The two main players are not going to die, yet, because then the conflict dissolves. But them dying is not my worst fear for the characters. For example, Rhaenyra dying is not my worst fear for Rhaenyra. I'm terrified that she's just going to keep losing her children, and that eventually, that compounding loss will break her. By doing this, you preserve the conflict completely. It's such a clean way to keep the stakes and promise emotional fallout at the same time. Also, dying is a single event, in most cases, but you can just keep breaking your characters over and over again in this invasively tragic way, and they still have to keep fighting because they still have children left to fight for. So, essentially, you're just setting them up to suffer and suffer and suffer. So, if we boil this House of the Dragon concept of motherhood down, what do we get? What place does it have in the sequence with Helena? Honestly, this moment is the crystallized expression of this story's concept of motherhood. Every facet of this darker perspective that we've mined from other characters is compounded into an unbelievably devastating black hole of a scene. Even before all of this begins, Helena had some idea about what was going to happen. This emphasizes the sense of inevitability and helplessness. Even if you know that your child will die, there isn't anything you can do to change it. It happens in a familiar place that is normally safe. There are no safe places anymore, even in their beds, even in parking lots, even 3 feet from you. She is given an impossible situation and an impossible decision, where the choice she has isn't really a choice. All paths lead to loss. And that because she still has a child, she has so much still to lose. And this moment right here, where she lifts her hand and points, this is the exact moment that a mother touches death for the first time, where she confronts it fully and realizes that there is no place where she can hide her children, that by being born, they doomed her to grief, that by giving them life, she doomed them to die. And when she touches death, when she processes that brutal truth, we also touch it. And dear God, is it horrifying. We get an uncensored proximity to the pain and price of creation. We get an uncomfortable glimpse of the darker decisions mothers must make when paying that price. We get the ironclad knowledge that our greatest strengths and our greatest joys are the things that will eventually break us. We get an intimate, invasive relationship with death. One where death waits for you in common things, where you are forced to confront it on a daily basis, where all of the decisions you thought you were making to protect your children were really just steps leading you to the only decision you can make. To surrender to death, accept the inevitable, take the child you have left, and run. Well, thank you so much for watching. Please like and subscribe to help heal the emotional damage making this video did to my soul.